I was raised in a single mom, grandparent home. We started out living on the south side of the city, and in the late 70s, early 80s, we moved out to the Creekwood community. Joined the cadet program in the fall of 1990, and I worked 2 years as a police cadet until I was old enough to go to basic law enforcement training. So the fall of '92, I was hired as a police trainee, went off to basic law enforcement training, graduated BLET around November-ish of '92, and I was sworn in as a Wilmington police officer on my 21st birthday on December 7th, 1992.
Today, Chief Donnie Williams, an accomplished African American, leads the Wilmington Police Department. In fact, he's the city's first ever African American chief who was sworn in 2020. But through the years, it wasn't an easy road for black officers in law enforcement. Since emancipation, black officers have been a part of the police department. Officer David Bryant, one of those brave men, was appointed in April of 1897 and reappointed in 1898. He served alongside men like Sergeant H.B. Green, Officers Joseph Anderson, Joe Sharp, F.P. Toomer, George Bell, and Thomas Moore. According to the Wilmington Dispatch in October of 1898, they were all laid off with full pay, being told they would be able to return, quote, after things quieted down after the election. Following the 1898 coup d'etat, these men were never rehired. In 1943, the African American community began a strong push for hiring black officers and even went to city council with their request. A committee of ministers and citizens asked council to hire black officers to patrol the north and south and central black districts of the city. More than 8 years later, in 1953, Edward Haynes was hired and became well respected by not only the African American community, but the WPD family as well. He alongside served with William Hill as the two first African American officers since the coup to join the WPD. From 1954 to 1960, black officers were not allowed to attend roll call. They reported to duty 30 minutes after white officers. After 1960, they were allowed to attend roll call, but had to stand at the ends of the lineup. Additionally, African American officers were assigned to walking beats in black neighborhoods and were only able to arrest offenders of the same race. They faced discrimination not only within the community, but within their department as well.
You felt to some extent that you were limited as to what you could do. You were confined to certain areas of patrol. Even in the cars, you were confined to certain areas, which was the north side of town, probably from Castle Street on back through Brooklyn, this part we're located now.
With the civil rights movement well underway in the 60s and the Wilmington 10 making national headlines in the 70s, Clarence Fredlaw, who was hired in 1964, had a front row seat to some of the most important parts of Wilmington history as he worked to keep the city and its residents safe and secure. While it was a rough start, as time went on, things did begin to improve for some black officers. Moving forward in the 1970s and 80s, notable African Americans who served the community include Sergeant Thomas McLaurin, Arthur Hayes, Thad Waddell, and Gerald Lincoln.
Sergeant Waddell and Sergeant Lincoln was role models to me when I started working, because they both supervised me and they taught me a lot of things. Some of the things they taught me carried on to the end of my career. That's when I started transitioning from being that officer that helped people only because they victim to crime to helping everyone, because the things that they did in the community was great, and I saw how the community responded to them every time they come to a scene. And I said, I want to be that officer that get the respect from the community, get the respect from your fellow officers in law enforcement. And that's why I transitioned from being a cop's to a people's cop.
I wanted to get into law enforcement because I was inspired by seeing Wilmington police officers out in my neighborhood doing great things for our community. One of the first community engagement events that I saw this department take part in was a field trip that took me as a preteen to the Asheboro Zoo in Asheboro, North Carolina. I went on that trip with the Wilmington Police Department with the late Sergeant Gerald Lincoln and Thad Waddell and some other Wilmington police officers. And being exposed to those two officers and retired Captain Bruce Hickman, it really amplified the sense of wanting to help people, and that's what led me to wanting to become a Wilmington police officer.
African American women like Officer Vicki Benjamin, who joined the force in 1979, and Mary Green, who was hired in 1986, were also instrumental to the department's success as they worked to create a better working relationship between law enforcement and African American families. African American civilians also played a crucial role in ensuring the department running smoothly. One notable man was Thomas Nixon, who was with the Wilmington Police Department from 1984 to 2009. He handled building maintenance and assisted with various projects in and around the station. He was well loved and respected, a member of the Wilmington Police Department family.
Mr. Nixon was a real good man, hard worker. I have to say that I do love Mr. Nixon for what he stood for and for what I learned from him the short period of time that I did work with him and underneath him. As I stated earlier, I got hired as a housekeeper under him, his supervision, and when I first got hired and working with him at the old building, we was in a process of getting rid of a lot of old stuff at the old building and moving and packing. And he always, some of the things I remember about Mr. Nixon is that he cared about the people that worked for him and underneath him. He looked out for them, he cared for them as if they were his own children. So I would have to say he was like a father figure to me.
In the 1990s and 2000s, officers like Kelvin Hargrove and Leslie Irving patrolled the streets.
1990, we were still in the midst of the crack epidemic. Law enforcement was at a state that we were mostly concerned about the war on drugs at that moment in my law enforcement career. Being in law enforcement was kind of a rare picture for African Americans to be in still. But of course we overcame it, and I became in law enforcement during that time to change the view of the African American community on law enforcement.
By me being a Wilmingtonian, I went away from school, came back home, and I always had an interest in law enforcement. And this one of the things I felt like is one way I could give back is to try to make my community safer, since by me being born and raised in Wilmington. I just feel like that you need to have more people that's either African American or brown, because then it's hopefully that someone can relate to, and you have to have proper representation in the department that mimics your community.
Most people will tell you in my 30-year career, you won't find anyone out there that can say that I've abused them or I've wronged them. I've just tried to be straight up with people and tell people how it is. But being the first chief of color, I realize what that means for this city, looking at some of the history that we've had here. And I'm just very humbled and very thankful that back in June of 2020, those 6 council members and the mayor had confidence in me to hire me into this position. And the fact that the prior chief and the city manager at the time, they supported me and they felt that I can carry out this job.
And like Chief Donnie Williams, African Americans continue to help move the department in a positive direction and make important contributions in the service of our community.